your host. Thank you for joining me tonight on this continued exploration and broad walk around of the phenomenon of unidentified anomalous phenomena and that of a potential non-human intelligent controller. It's a pleasure to be with you again tonight. And tonight we're going to be looking at investigating non-human intelligence and insights into the entities, the encounters, and the possible engagements that may historically have taken place and may be taking place today. So again, thank you for joining me. In the last two episodes of Emergent, we covered the encounter with non-human intelligence and the potential engagement. And I thought it was a good idea tonight to revisit those two possible realities and think through from the ground up what the nature of these entities might be and examine some of the theories of non-human intelligence. And then with that, we will be further examining the encounter and the engagement. Let's see here. Let's put that there. All right. And then we'll be looking at a number of other items, including the idea of creating what I might call a personal disclosure plan. In light of the fact that it appears that confirmation of a non-human intelligence is growing more likely, I think it's a good time to stop and think, how would one individually deal with that event, participate in it, be supportive to society at large as people process the groundbreaking or potentially earth-shattering realization that we are not alone in the cosmos or even within our own world. So we'll talk about how we might play a role in that phase of human life that might be on the horizon, where we acknowledge that reality. And then at the end, I'm going to turn to an Emergent AMA and take your questions. And so if you have questions about NHI burning in your mind, cue them up into Slido here. Hit that QR code or visit that link and begin to put your questions in the queue. Today's episode is going to be very interactive. I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions and engaging with your response. So that'll all be taking place on Slido. So good thing to have that up on screen before we begin. All right, let's begin by talking about this term, non-human intelligence. What is meant by this? I think there are some very important positives to the shift from extraterrestrial to alien to NHI. First, it circumvents some of the resistance and the ridicule factor regarding those other words that has been generated mindlessly or mindfully by certain actors in the world, not least of which is our own government. So it allows more people to enter this arena of consideration that there are intelligences other than our own operating in the world. It is, I would say, the ontological path of least resistance because it allows people to entertain the possible alien presence, which I do think is in the world, with other non-human intelligences and presences that people already acknowledge as real, whether that's angels or individuals, ascended masters, individuals on other planes of existence, naturalistic forces, other things like that, psychological forces that exist outside physical corporeal life. So, most people probably hold some belief that there is a form of intelligence other than our own, be it physical or not. And so it allows people to walk right into this potential reality of what the UAP and UFO phenomenon have been demonstrating to us for well over 80 years. Now for some of the problems with this term. Let's talk about the term itself, the category it's in, and this problem of inclusivity. What is included within it? There's a risk of expanding a term until it loses its precision. Is NHI still describing the phenomena associated with UAP, but also with close approaches by UAP to human beings and close encounters with reported occupants of UAP? Is it still precise enough, or is it going to be kind of semantically eroded out from under that? And then it's just, intelligences that are non-human of any kind. And so a little bit of risk there. The category, expanding a category until it's meaningless. The category of this intelligence that is non-human. Well, how many things are non-human that are intelligent in the world, right? I mean, we have, animal life, possible non-physical phenomena that people already believe in. So is it all together Is it all one? And that's the problem with this other word called the phenomenon. People consider the phenomenon as this broad, ever expanding collection of phenomena, not all of which is closely associated or directly tied causally with each other. And so when we consider the possible psychological phenomena that might attend people either focusing on the UFO reality or interfacing with it directly, are those psychological phenomena truly connected to this potential structured object, this craft under intelligent control, which represents UFO? And so, the mixing and merging of consciousness and psi and all of this, I understand that the arrival to our world of a potential other form of intelligence does open up a universe of possibilities. But there is a problem of of broadening the categories so much that it is really talking about just reality itself. So I think there's a risk there. So the term has changed, but suffice it to say that there is greater acknowledgement that NHI and UAP are a reality. How did we get here? How did this happen? Seems to be that starting in 2017 with the publication of a New York Times article and the release of several unconfirmed videos from the Pentagon, that this new reality has burst into at least some subset of the population's awareness, and it seems to be making inroads into general awareness year by year. I would say that the groundbreaking moment after that time came in 2023 at the hearings in Congress when three individuals testified regarding the reality of unidentified anomalous phenomena and other directly experienced events that they had in their professional or military careers. And I want to specifically focus on the statements of David Grush, which I found to be groundbreaking. In fact, they were a big part of what called me back into this field because I could tell that the nature of the discourse was changing. This was not a press conference in the early 2000s on UFOs. This was something different. Something was being spoken to by credible people on a forum and on a stage such that this would not go away. This would get investigated. And it was to some degree unstoppable in that sense. And here I'd like to play a clip of that hearing that I remember very well. And the statements made here, I do believe, are a high watermark in the disclosure of this phenomenon to the public, but they are just the beginning. Let's have a listen.
Of the pilots who piloted this craft.
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
So that's just a small clip, but a lot more was said, including claims of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, and later claims of a global arms race over possible technologies of non-human origin. Statements like this by individuals who had access directly to information and insight into the programs involved being presented under oath in front of the House of Congress with the most powerful nation on earth, I think was the beginning, the few pebbles sliding down the mountain that started the beginnings of a landslide. And I would say we're only in those beginnings, a slow moving landslide. And at the bottom of the mountain is the rest of humanity. And so they're going to find out one way or another, or one day or another, that we are not alone in our own world. We are not the only sentience present here. We are not the only sentience with intent and with an interest and a stake in this world. We are not alone. And if we're not alone and there's another sentience, we have to begin to contend with that reality. It's a meeting of minds. It's a contending of will and purpose. And it is potentially a friction in the sense of there's our human interest, what we humans value and believe to be cherished and worth pursuing, and all of the institutions and social realities and governmental realities that uphold that. But then there's the interest of another set of intelligences. What do they want? What is their interest for being present here? And I think we're going to increasingly have to contend with that. I want to do a little step back here because some might be asking, wait. So UAP are real, unidentified anomalous phenomena, but that doesn't mean NHI are real or that correlates to NHI. And I think this is important to consider together because no, the two are not the same. And UAP in all cases are most certainly not all the cause or under the control of another intelligence than our own. But I'd like to anchor into this show a premise. Have this on screen here. And my premise is that we are dealing with a real technology, a technological phenomenon, not just something natural or psychological or non-physical. We're not just dealing with a technology, but a structured craft, meaning it has apparent means of propulsion. It is transiting in a air, land, sea, trans-medium movement. And by all accounts, these structured craft are interacting with other human craft in the air, in the water, and they're interacting with people on the land, on ground. Next, that they are under some kind of intelligent control. We don't know what that intelligence is fully, but it is intelligent. It is responsive to us. It is detecting us, pursuing us, evading us, maybe playing games with us, maybe demonstrating presence or force or capability to us. And then it is non-human in origin. It is not from this world, at least the world of humanity. Not to say that there are not potentially alien reproduction vehicles or other reverse engineered craft that have their origins in this non-human technology and intelligently controlled craft. But I would assert that this is non-human in origin. There is no developmental pathway that we're aware of in science and technology and engineering that would give rise to the performance capabilities and the flight characteristics that we're observing in these structured craft. So, and then last, that craft, at least in some cases, is under non-human control. And I also would say in some cases it might be under human control. And this is the new confusing playing field that we're on of having to suss out who's who and what's what, and what craft belongs to which player, and why they're flying where they're flying, with what intent. It's a complex new playing field that we have to begin to navigate. And so this is the game we're in. We could be encountering multiple non-human intelligences with either complementary or competing intent. They might be collaborative, or they might be in some state of conflict. And we're in the middle somewhere, 80 years into what might be this crash, this reverse engineering program that David Grush talked about. And so are their craft being controlled by human actors, state actors, defense companies that seem to perform in the way a true unidentified anomalous craft might perform? So it's a complex new reality. But I would say at this stage in the game, UAP have demonstrated capabilities so far beyond anything we have ever developed or acknowledged to have developed that we have to begin to consider that the intelligence controlling this craft is one other than our own. We have to begin to move from talking about craft to controller, and who's behind the wheel. Who's behind the wheel? Apologies. Why are they in the world? What are they doing in our skies, on land and in water, and for what purpose? So these are the responsible questions to be asking. I would say it's a form of responsible speculation. In fact, we are in a state of not having enough evidence and indications to fully conclude the nature of the who and the what, the how and the why. But we have to be asking those fundamental questions at this stage in the game. That's responsibility. So I'd like to turn and talk to you now and put on screen these 5 observables that have been brought forward. I think this goes back to what Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon have spoken to, the 5 observables of UAP. And I want to ask you, let's see, bring this up on screen here. I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. There we go. Which of these 5 observables is the strongest indication of a genuine non-human technology? Think through this for a minute. Cast your vote, and then we'll talk about that. Which of the five observables is the strongest indication of a genuine non-human technology? Maybe folks are getting into the Slido. We'll put the link in the chat wherever you are. But I look forward to seeing what you think, because some of these observables could potentially be accounted for by advanced aerospace technologies, secret military platforms, foreign adversary programs that we just have no insight into. And so, again, this is not to say that all UAP are UAP, right? There are craft of Earth origin that have a developmental origin in human technologies. But some UAP are truly UAP. And I would assert that some of those are truly controlled by some form of intelligence other than our own. Let's see. Let's go back to the poll here. Interesting. Transmedium travel. Okay. I mean, it is possible that there are air and sea-based drones that can perform in these ways, that there might be submersible vehicles belonging to, a foreign adversary that are scouting our coasts. Anti-gravity lift. I mean, we don't know the advances that have been made in the deep corridors of power among the superpowers of the world. Low observability and cloaking as well, which also might partly be accounted for by the observer or the sensing platform not being able to fully detect it. And I'm not saying that's true in all cases. I'm just saying in some cases we should assume that it is true. So I want to go to this first one, which seems like most people have called out: sudden and instantaneous acceleration. Think about that for a minute. To accelerate to the tune of 100 Gs. So I think 7 to 9 G forces is what a human being can survive in the right kind of environment with the right kind of craft, airplane. But what about 100 Gs? What about 500 or 1,000? How would a human being, a human controller, survive that force? That to me might stand out as one of the observables that demonstrates the non-human origin of the phenomenon, in part, the best. It's interesting stuff. There are other observables that have been described. The Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies has described the five observables in slightly different ways and a little bit more descriptive. I'll read these to you. Interactive flight, radical flight, electronic transmission, interference with weapon systems, loitering in the sky for long periods, close approaches, and also observed occupants and encounters with occupants. And so that gets into the whole new wild and crazy world of non-human intelligence that we're here to talk about. But just to pause on this for another moment, the performance capabilities are just phenomenal. In one of the Navy videos that was released in 2017, apparently it was detected on radar that one of these objects was able to descend from 80,000 feet to near sea level in several seconds. Just fathom that capability to accelerate up to a speed and then stop on a dime. Truly phenomenal. In another estimate, another research paper, the speed recorded and captured on a sensing platform was 44,000 miles per hour. That was the estimated speed of this physical, structured object. Pretty phenomenal. And so here we transition into that world of potential observed occupants and encounters with occupants. And to step into that, I'd like to play this video, well known. I've played it before, pounding it into your awareness. But another groundbreaking moment, I would say, possibly the next groundbreaking moment following those hearings in 2023. Let's play this. This is Alex Klokas asking retired Colonel Carl Nell a very big question.
Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet.
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
Quite the statement by a former colonel who functioned on the UAP task force that was mandated by the legislative branch of the government of my country to investigate UAP on behalf of the elected government. These are quite the statements that there are unelected people in government who are aware of this. And so if they're aware of this, what does that mean about the general population? Do they need to become aware of it? Are they already becoming aware of it? And what are the implications of that? That, of course, is a huge focus of Emergent. And so I want to dive into NHI now and look at what are the theories of NHI being and origin. There are a lot of theories out there, and it's becoming a crowded field. And it might be quite difficult for the public to step into it and to make heads or tails of what is being asserted about NHI and what is also being said that NHI are not or are not fully. And I know there's a lot of competing ideas about that. So I want to start by asking you the question. And here it is on screen back in Slido. Which theory of non-human intelligence best explains the reported encounters taking place? If you're a student of the phenomenon, you know what some of those encounters are. If not, maybe just cast your vote based on how you perceive this reality of NHI today. We have extraterrestrial visitors, meaning not from Earth and in visitation. We have interdimensional entities, not from this dimensional space, but transiting into it and demonstrating what we see in the phenomenon. We have possible theories of time-traveling humans, humans that might have, humans from the future that have found a way to travel back in time, and they've evolved hundreds of thousands or millions of years beyond us, and that's why they might look different than us and have such capabilities. Non-physical intelligences, everything from divine entities, angelic entities, other non-physical natural presences or entities in the Earth system, ultra-terrestrial entities, localized, but from a higher reality beyond conventional space-time, or partly so, and then possibly crypto-terrestrial, localized but hidden intelligences that coexist with us here on Earth. So I'm going to leave this up on screen for a minute, and as you're voting, I'll just kind of talk on top of this. And I'd like to just we can go back to the camera here, but let's look at this. These competing seem to be the two front runners in the pack are the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and the interdimensional hypothesis. And I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Put it in the let's see. I'm actually going to move over to this. This is an open text field in Slido. This will let you put your thoughts in there. I'd like to see what you think about why is the extraterrestrial hypothesis strongly favored, and why is the interdimensional hypothesis strongly favored over it? What is going on with these two theories? Because as far as I see it, some of these performance capabilities are such that they defy the laws of known physics. The craft movements are so fast, they're faster than the speed of light. Some have claimed that these entities are defying the laws of God's universe and therefore cannot possibly be physical alien. They have to be something else. Some claim that they're demonic as a result of just their capabilities in flight. And there's also the reality that they potentially, it's all theoretical, but that they exist right where we are and manifest and demanifest. And that's what maybe cloaking or reduced visibility might be accounted for. But see, I would put forward the possibility here that are we dealing with an interdimensional entity that is manifesting in physical form and then demanifesting? Or are we dealing with an alien entity that has found ways to manipulate space-time and to defy our physics and to perform in ways that are technological in nature, but that seem interdimensional, that seem non-physical in nature. I think that's a strong possibility. So as you think this through, put your comments there in the Slido, and we'll look at those together, see what makes sense to you. Let's look at the non-physical side of these theories. So, are these sentient beings, but not in physical form? Are they spiritual, energetic, or consciousness based? And I think a lot of the reason why people theorize this is because there appears to be a non-physical psychic nature to the interaction taking place. People have purely consciousness-based experiences of these entities. Not in waking states of consciousness, not with their eyes, but they are visited in dreams, for example, or in other altered states. Others would go back in time and look at the ancient record, look at the biblical record, and say, "Oh, they've been here all along. Look, they're in our scripture," which I think is a very weak argument to make. How do we know that they are them, right? How do we verify that a possible reported entity in ancient times has anything to do with what's happening now? There's so little information available about those experiences. And here I'd like to put forward the possibility that, are we dealing with a non-physical intelligence causing psychic effects that then take a perceived physical form, meaning the entity itself is not physical, they're creating a psychic or consciousness-based experience, and we are misperceiving it as physical? Or is this a physical entity that has found ways to engage in a psychic layer of reality, a mental or psychic environment? Or have they developed technologies of mind that amplify the power of mind to enter that space and to interact with other physical entities like ourselves who also have a presence in that psychic space? Given all we're learning about extrasensory perception, telepathy, psionics, things like that we humans are capable of, let's just imagine that there's a physical, non-human entity thousands of years beyond us that has taken those capabilities to a whole other level and has married them with certain forms of technology to amplify their power and to allow them to transit the psi-phys barrier, brain-blood barrier, the psi-phys barrier at will. Now, we may perceive that as, oh my gosh, we're dealing with a non-physical entity. This has to be an angel or something demonic. Or maybe, mythologies have long held that there are fairies and ghosts and other paranormal phenomena at play, which might be possible. So we posit that, and yet we have to entertain the possibility that physical beings could develop capabilities that could interact in a purely psi or consciousness level of reality. Next, let's just quickly turn over here to origin in space and time. So is it an extraterrestrial origin, another planetary system, or are they time traveling? They're from here, they're from the future. Is it spatial or temporal? What is their origin? Well, time travel is pretty theoretical, and to lean on that entirely to explain this phenomenon seems to me a bit unwise. We're grasping for straws, and when we say that maybe, triple maybe, a future human just found a technology to come back in time, and they have evolved how many millions of years? A lot of millions of years to look like a gray alien. Humans and chimpanzees are only 5 to 6 million years apart, and look how much we share. Same number of digits, very similar DNA. What about these entities that are being reported? They're not all bipedal. They're not all of a human type morphology. So does this time traveling human, this theory, really account for the phenomenon accurately and fully? I would say it probably does not. And everything we're learning about from astrobiology about Earth-like worlds in the Goldilocks zone of a star system similar to our own. We're learning about life having arisen on Earth in what's called the Hadean era, when the Earth's crust was still cooling, There's, I think, some theories about that. There's just so much we're beginning to understand about how life takes hold, at least on this planet, that it just seems like a very ready theory to make that it could happen elsewhere. This world is not a universe apart. And so I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis has a lot of weight still, even though I know, and maybe it is because of this over categorization, that we're adding everything to this quote phenomenon, when really and originally there was a phenomenon of structured physical craft being operated by entities that have been observed with eyes and ears and sight, smell, sound, five senses. And so at the center of it all is that. Are there other phenomena at play? Of course, I'm sure there are. And does the realization of a physical alien visitor open us into a larger um, consideration of life and of consciousness? It does, but there is still that phenomenon for us to deal with. Let's turn over to some of your thoughts here. All right, Socorro, Travis Walton, Betty and Barney are the most famous, but I don't know what's going on with abductions, if they slowed down or researchers passed away, and stigma or fear of talking about it. Well, there does seem to be some stigma or fear of talking about something like abductions. And yet, how many people have reported this experience consistently across the world and across many decades? Quite a lot. Is that hard evidence? No. But is it an indication? Is it what Gary Nolan might call pre-data, right? So it's an indication that says you might want to go collect some data on that and go figure out if that's really happening. To my knowledge, that has not fully occurred, and I think really needs to happen in the years ahead. We need to conclusively determine whether abductions are happening. And of course, I know there is a psi component. There are consciousness-based abductions, some people believe, but the physical abduction of one's body and the ensuing events that follow has been experienced and reported by a lot of people. And so, it is a phenomenon in that sense. It is occurring in the experience of people and could be researched further. They want to confuse us. Let's see here. I need to scroll. They want to confuse us, so they will throw whatever into the mental environment. If we think they are light beings and non-physical, we will give our power away to them. We will want to escape this physical reality, and therefore they can manipulate and control us better. I do think, the capability of manipulating perception is definitely in the record of human NHI reported encounters. So is it possible that they can command our internal senses and visual and auditory senses to see and hear what they might want us to see and hear? Is this another form of cloaking? They're not actually cloaking anything. They're manipulating perception to effectively be cloaked. I think those are possibilities as well. So we need to think about that. And it is, it's a concerning factor here of in this engagement with NHI, how are we regarded? Do we have agency? Is there informed consent? Do we know what they are doing and why? This is a problem. It's a big problem in the phenomenon. And if there is mental manipulation or mental conditioning going on, then we need to step back, I would say, and not run to embrace an unknown entity with an unknown intent and render our mind and body open to them to whatever purpose they might have. It might not be malevolent only. They may think it's purely beneficial, but they may not understand us, our values, our spirit, our sense of internal divine origin, for example. We don't know if they understand who we believe ourselves to be. And so they may be doing things that profoundly transgress that they do not perceive as malevolent. So I think that step back is going to be important. I'm going to go over here. Let's see. Go back to which theory best explains reported encounters taking place. I'm not sure how many votes we've got on this, but it seems that there is some agreement that the extraterrestrial hypothesis still is the central player in this field of competing theories. And I think there's good reason for it. It's right there in the historical record. We have craft with shape that might be, might be determined to be aerodynamic, with landing gear that actually put themselves on the ground, and entities exit the craft and engage with people. It's right there in the historical record. Need we go to the interdimensional level of theory or the time traveling human, right? We have discovered exactly 0 alternate dimensions. We have never conclusively determined if time travel is possible. It's not to say it's not, but to basically say that that's what's really going on. That's the fundamental scenario of play. I don't myself think that's the case. Okay. I want to ask you this next question here. As we begin to look at some of that historical record, which reports or historical cases best characterize the overall encounter with non-human intelligence that may be taking place? I'm sorry. Got this. Oh, looks like I had the wrong question up. Okay. Looks like a little bit more is piling in here. Well, as you're piling more in, I'll just share that, looking back in the record of evidence of the phenomenon, we have these phenomenal performance capabilities in the air, these aerospace incidents and interactions. There's obviously the go fast and the tic tac incidents, but there are other less well-known incidents. I've got one in front of me here. Here we have the Coin helicopter, quote, green beam encounter. A U.S. Army Huey helicopter, 1973, encountered a bright cigar-shaped UFO in Ohio. The craft rapidly approached head-on, emitted a bright green beam into the cockpit, and immediately the helicopter's controls were overridden, and the aircraft was mysteriously pulled upward several hundred feet. That's quite an encounter. Let's look at this other one here. I was looking into the information that George Knapp brought out of the USSR recently regarding a huge body of UFO encounters that have taken place there. And apparently there are 45 distinct incidents with Russian fighter jets clashing with UFOs. Who would know, right? But apparently that's the case. And, some very famous ones. Let's see, we got this here. We have the Russian ICBM case in Ukraine. We'll get to that in a minute. But yes, a number of altercations in the air with Soviet aircraft during the Cold War. That's a tense and testy time to be engaging with anomalous craft with nuclear weapons at play and tension across Europe. So, bit concerning. Here's another one that I only recently learned about. The Kinross incident in 1953, when an F-89 Scorpion interceptor was scrambled to investigate an unknown radar target over Lake Superior. The operators on the ground saw the F-89 merge with the target on screen, and then contact with both craft vanished. The plane and its 2-man crew were never found. Interesting. Moving to the ground. Ground observations are a huge aspect of what's been observed. So we have the Belgian wave in the late 80s, early 90s, a series of sightings that took place over Belgium that involved thousands of eyewitnesses and military personnel, and highly well documented. I have a number of cases in front of me, don't have time to go into them all. We have the 2006 Chicago O'Hare incident when a disc-shaped craft was seen floating over one of the terminals. It was seen by multiple people and airport staff, and it was observed to shoot straight up into the air and punch a hole in the cloud cover above the airport. Well documented. There's a lot of evidence and documentation from the FAA that helped corroborate this. So, moving to closer to the ground here, in terms of the actual encounters with people, we have, of course, the Colares incidents in Brazil, and in which individuals were engaged by anomalous craft and were reportedly harmed by these craft. There was the use of some kind of direct energy or laser light weapon, and people had all sorts of burn marks on their bodies. I do believe several people died from these injuries. And this initiated Operation Prato. The Brazilian military came in to observe the phenomenon, record everything they could about it. They became the target of it as well. And of course, all of that photo and video evidence was rapidly squirreled away into the deep archives of that government or other governments. We don't know. But a lot of indications of people being directly approached and having some kind of biological effect from that, and possibly even being attacked or targeted by these craft. Here's another interesting one I'll throw your way. 1979, Sheriff Val Johnson. This is really interesting. I will read this one to you. So in the early hours of the day, August 27th, the Marshall County Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson was on a lonely rural road in Minnesota when he saw a brilliant light. As he drove toward it, the light suddenly shot directly at his vehicle, blinding him and causing a collision. He was found dazed. 39 minutes later, his car had skidded off the road with significant damage. But interestingly, the damage was extremely precise. The windshield was shattered with apparently like spiderweb cracks. The hood was dented, and all of that damage was in a narrow swath, only a foot wide across the vehicle. A little bit of other attending information here. The deputy's wristwatch and the car's electric clock had stopped for 14 minutes, suggesting some kind of possible missing time experience or electromagnetic effect. And he himself suffered some injury and what are called what's akin to welder burns from what might have been intense ultraviolet light. So these are some of the close encounters, the less well-known cases that might actually typify the nature of what has historically happened, even though, for each one of these, how many dozens are unreported, unknown. The individuals never came forward. They took it to the grave, or they did submit these reports, and those reports were hastily bundled up and put 10 levels down in the Pentagon. So we don't know. And that really is it. We don't fully know the extent of the NHI human encounter. And then to touch on a few other elements of this encounter, water and a fixation on water, USO, unidentified submerged objects interacting with boats, watercraft, swimmers, divers. There's some pretty eye-opening cases that have come to my attention recently about that. And then the nuclear connection, well documented. This interest in our nuclear capabilities and some kind of intent to obstruct either their development, their use, or to test what would happen should they intervene with these weapon systems. These weapon systems have both been deactivated by reported UAP and activated by reported UAP. Which, again, in the context of the Cold War, when many of these took place, that's pretty testy activity. Intense times when superpowers basically have their finger on the trigger, and launch of nuclear weapons is not a deliberative decision. It's meant to be fast and such that no individual can stop it. So I think that's pretty concerning. Not necessarily a message of peace, but definitely some kind of intent to intervene. And the list goes on. There are individuals who have reported injury due to these close encounters, abduction, and the whole phenomenon gets a lot deeper than that. And if you're interested in how deep it goes, I encourage you to sign up for my course, Decoding the Intent of Non-Human Intelligence. I'll have it on my last slide, but head to my website. It's right there at the top. And we're going to dive pretty deep into that and use some of these indications to make intelligent assessments about what the intent of these entities might be. So this is just a surface level overview, but we can go a lot deeper. Let's look at what you guys had. Let's go back over to the Slido here. Jacques Vallée's research in the 60s and beyond, his theory of UFOs as a control mechanism, posits that non-human intelligence may have been influencing human culture for centuries, using subtle interactions that don't fit the conventional alien invasion narrative. Yes, I am partway into that book that you're referencing. It is interesting. And, this control mechanism, this reported ability to control perception, to control information, and research and data collection is inherent to the phenomenon. And so, what does that say? I mean, if they are physical alien and there is an intent to control perception in that way, we have to get to topics of ethics and sovereignty. And again, consensual contact, very important. If these are not physical alien entities, but are pervasive, interdimensional, or localized, ultra terrestrial, would we be seeing this kind of control mechanism throughout history? Is the phenomenon a linear straight line? Is it, or has it deviated? Has it amplified and grown in scope? Has it changed in terms of where it appears in the world? What age groups it interacts with? We need more information about that. But to my knowledge, there is a qualitative and quantitative difference between the modern 20th century reported UAP activity and what we see in the historical record. It just does not look like an ever-present, statically engaging phenomenon to me. I'd like to turn now and look at not just the encounters that are taking place, whether in the air, on land, in the water, with close encounters with individuals, but the larger engagement that might be taking place. How would we characterize the scenario of engagement? And I'd like to, again, to ask you that question. So I'll put this up on screen here. Take your vote. You can pick more than one, by the way. So how would you characterize the scenario of engagement taking place? I'll give you a minute there. I think it's worth noting that we are a surface-dwelling apex species on a planet that is uniquely rich in its biological diversity, its habitability, and we are observing these structured craft under intelligent control, and they seem to be, in my view, at least in some state of observation and study, if not much more. And so, the interest, what is the nature of that interest? Planet and people. And I would put under planet its biology, its mineral composition, its oceans and hydrology, and its habitability, its relationship to other planetary bodies. I mean, we live on this planet, and these craft are appearing on this planet. And so planet might be a big part of the purpose for this engagement with the human species. I think we also need to acknowledge that interaction over time indicates that a relationship exists. They intend to interact. We're not initiating this interaction, to my knowledge. We're not sending out space probes and landing on their planet. They're landing on our planet, or they're interfacing with our planet. And so there is an intent to interact and to form some kind of dynamic between them and us. So what is that dynamic? What is the relationship? And, I think it's implausible to imagine that their value system, their belief system, even the way they would conceive of themselves, the universe, their level of consciousness is highly dissimilar from ours. And it's inconceivable that the intent and the interest that would arise from that would be commensurate with ours, that would be equal, that they would have our best interests in mind only. So I think that there's a differential in intent is to be expected. And, this is what happens in relationship. You have to negotiate intents. You have to understand the intentions of another, what motivates them, and negotiate that motivation against your own. And I don't see enough people questioning that. There seems to be a default belief that they're so far advanced technologically that they must be so far advanced ethically, morally, and spiritually, and that we can trust what they say and they do. We don't have to question it too hard. We don't have to think instinctually, defensively. We can race towards this interaction with other forms of intelligence. And I understand the motivation there, which is the desire to expand beyond the human limits, to experience a greater universe, be a part of that fabric of life. But what do we really know about them? Do we know enough to engage in close relationship, physically, psychically, and in terms of how we might collaborate or integrate with them, as some advocate doing? So let's go over to your Slido responses here. Looks pretty well distributed. Colonization stands out. Study and analysis stands out. Integration. By defense, what I meant by that is that they are here out of their own need to defend themselves, whether it's because of our use of nuclear weapons or the fear of human beings spilling out into the exosystem of life beyond this earth. In my view, I think we're moving beyond the plausible explanation of observation and curiosity and interest as the sole indications of, or the sole scenarios of interaction taking place. There is a down and in intention. There is an intention to be involved in the world and to be engaged with human beings programmatically over time, and to enact some form of study and experimentation, but also possibly some form of genetic intervention, some intent to interact with the course our species is taking, to maybe to redirect it, maybe to integrate it with theirs. Again, this could all be a form of self-interest. It's not malevolent per se. We all have self-interests that compete with other self-interests. We don't call ourselves evil or demonic as a result of that. We just call ourselves self-interested. And again, if these are physical alien entities arising in this universe of hostile planetary environments and interstellar space, where resources and the fundamental building blocks of life have to be sourced and utilized to build a civilization, especially when capable of interstellar travel, my goodness, there might be some interest that is self-motivated in that. And I would not be surprised. I think that should be like default thinking. Day one thinking is they're here for their reasons, not for ours. Day two thinking is how do we assess that against our need for human development, human safety, the survival of the human species. And then there's day 3, 4, 5, and 6 thinking, but that they don't have an intent, or that their intent is no risk to us and our interests, I think is an implausible position to take on day one. Looking at the deeper aspects of the phenomenon, and I think it is responsible to be doing that at this point. If non-human intelligence is here interacting with us, how are they interacting? And it's not only in what we know or what we think we might have indication of in terms of the close human encounters. It could be much deeper than that. It could be involved with our military defense establishments. It could be involved in our technological systems. It could be involved in manipulating religious belief, or any layer of humanity and our cultures and societies. So it's responsible to be investigating that potential interaction at this point. But the way I would see it, is this is a potential contest of wills, intents, and purposes. And our developmental track has exploded over the last 80 years since the period of the Great World Wars. Technologically, it's exploded. The psychic space of the world, I'd say, has changed a good deal. And so, is that purely driven by human activity? Possibly not. There could be a non-human component to that. And again, if we go back to planet and people, we might start to ask, well, why this planet? What interests them about it, or what interests them about us? Is there something unique at play? And I think if we begin to look at where NHI tend to engage individual human beings, I'm talking about the temporal, the time, like what decades, what years was their peak activity, spatial, where in the world, geography, circumstantial, around what events in the world, what geopolitical movements. There is evidence to be found and data to be collected that we need to do a better job collecting. And again, assessment leads, in my view, the evidence collection process. You don't just kind of stare at a screen and just receive whatever the screen gives you and say, well, based on that data, I will conclude X. I think we have to target what we're looking at on the screen. Just pointing a camera at the sky and waiting for a UAP to appear is not going to give us insight into their intentions. It is the human encounters. It is their fixation, again, time, place, geography, that's going to give us indications and is going to differentiate between different forms of contact that might be taking place. So I think that's really important to look at. All right. Let's see where we are time-wise here at the hour. Sip of tea. Let's talk about disclosure. Big D disclosure. I know we all want it, but I'm gonna ask you, are we ready for it? And I don't mean collectively, actually. I mean personally, individually. I think we're going to find ourselves in a situation we were not prepared for and didn't think through pretty fast as that rolls out. And this is where this idea came to mind of a personal disclosure plan. How are you going to respond in the days, weeks, and months after there is a federal form, our government, another government, a non-governmental potential organization disclosing that non-human intelligence is in the world interacting with humanity. So let me ask you some questions as we dive into that here. And I'm going to put this on screen now. In the event of a broad form of disclosure of NHI, how would you explain the nature of the entities and their intentions to people around you? Put yourself for a moment in the scenario that news media is on fire with certain claims that are made by some governing authority. And the claims are that we are engaging another form of intelligence and that is what accounts for part of the observed UAP UFO phenomenon. The claim might be that it's been happening for a long time. The claim might be that there's nothing to worry about, that it's purely observational, certainly no threat involved, no risk, no hazard, don't panic, just trust us, we'll take care of it. And so, and onward, I mean, there might be claims of a beneficial form of visitation. There might be some kind of mass demonstration because, NHI are players in the game too. They can respond to us as we disclose them, which is another aspect of what might be coming. And so just imagine a scenario when the people in your life, your family, colleagues, your community are in a state of just hair on fire. What's going on? What does it mean? Is it amazing? Is it terrible? Should we go towards it? Should I be afraid? How do I deal with this? So just put in the Slido here some thoughts that you might have on how would you explain this to people? How would you explain this to people? And again, resist the urge to just placate and soothe and make it okay, right? It is what it is. I'm not asking you to say to people what they want to hear so that they don't panic. I'm asking, how do you accurately inform them as to the nature of what's going on to the best of your knowledge? So if that's a challenge because you're aware of some difficult aspects of the phenomenon, let's think through that. And, for those who've been watching the show, I have this UFO conversation a lot with people. I do it as much as I can. And it's as simple as this. It's, let me ask you a question. If it turned out that we were not alone in the universe, that they discovered some form of alien life, how would you respond to that? Ask somebody that question. Okay. Usually people wouldn't be surprised, be amazed if this is the only place where life has ever arisen. No problem in my view, in my religion, or in my outlook on life. Okay. Let me ask you this. What if that intelligence was here in the world, interacting with humanity? Now people might ask, wait, so do you mean like some kind of angelic or, I don't know, some consciousness-based entity or something from scripture? To which I would say, no, I would say an intelligence connected to the hard physical phenomenon of unidentified flying objects, a structured craft under intelligent control, demonstrating real forms of technology that are almost certainly non-human in origin. And then they think, oh, wow, so you're talking about some kind of physical alien being. Yes, that's correct, I'd say. And they would think through that. And in many cases, in my experience, people immediately go to, well, why would they be here? What do they want? And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, totally unprompted by me, totally, right out of the gate, who have never thought about this seriously, by the way. They'll say, I'm sure they're here to get something that we have, or that something that the earth has, or they're here with some intention, some resource that they want or something like that. And I'm like, wow, that's first line thinking in my view. That's saying, okay, if there is a physical alien entity with structured craft engaging in us in a programmatic way over a long period of time that has an intent, it is the intent to gain something, possibly just information, but also many other things that our human Earth system might possess. First line thinking, what is it they want? That's what the public wants to know. And with this shift to NHI, I get that shift, but I wonder if the public is following suit, because everywhere I see NHI mentioned anywhere in the mainstream, the next word is alien. And I understand why, because it's first line thinking. Now, if that's discouraged or ridiculed, that's another matter. But given everything we know, we should be thinking in those terms initially, and then broaden from there based on what the evidence suggests. Okay, with that, I'll turn to you some of your comments here. Let's put that on screen. What would you tell people? That they are people just like us with different morphology, but with much more advanced technology. They are dependent on resources like us and have vulnerabilities like us. They're not angels, they're not demons. Just look in the mirror and see the ETs as people like us, but with more advanced technology and advanced knowledge of the mental environment. That right there is a fascinating entree to a whole other level of the conversation, which I have enjoyed having with people in the public. And it's just amazing to see what comes out of people. There is an instinctual response here. When your habitat is being infringed upon, if you're a form of animal life, if your habitat's being infringed upon by another species or another group within your species, there is often an instinctual response. It is somewhat defensive in nature because these individual animal life forms understand the amount of territory and resource they need to survive and to replicate. And there is a biological urge to replicate their genetic code forward, right? So there's competition in nature. There's complex mating rituals and complex mating conflict, and this is in the instinct, because the instinct is to survive and to continue one's species forward. Where is our instinct in this? It's a question. I don't hear people responding to this very instinctually. There seems to be a powerful need, psychological need, to see it a certain way. And I think there is an inherent fear to this. And I hear it most from those who talk in the language of love and light, afraid of not being loving, terrified of being fearful, right? There is a fear-driven positivity, a positive washing of this phenomenon that is strange to me. It seems to be uniquely psychological and reactive, and it's not based in the evidence of the phenomenon. It's not first-line thinking. It's definitely not prioritizing human interests and needs first, to just say, come on in, whatever you want, whoever you are, let's do this. The risk and the hazard of the presence of undisclosed covert operating entities is tremendous. It's undeniable. And not just because of them, because of us. Just think of the potential risk of miscoordinated actions by state governments due to this phenomenon. And I would throw disclosure in there as well. One nation discloses. What about their competitors? How do they feel about that? Did they coordinate that action with each other? Right? This is the hazard that ensues simply because NHI is here. We're not even getting to their intent yet. It's just their presence. Other forms of risk are that they are interacting with people in ways that violate their personal values, their sense of sovereignty, free will, and that are creating risk in society. That's another hazard. And again, the entities may not be malevolent at all. Don't need to use that word. Self-interested. They have an interest. Nothing more. It's just not our interest. First line thinking. Um, and yeah, so I think we need to reground ourselves in how we perceive this phenomenon. And if there are emotions driving us, that's something we need to look at. And that's one of my personal disclosure plan questions. I'll go through these with you. Let's see here. Okay. Managing oneself in a post-disclosure era. So this is a question for you, and I'll just speak these questions. You can just feel it out for yourself. How would you respond to the broad affirmation that a non-human intelligence is interacting with humanity? Feeling-wise, how would you respond? Okay. If you have an emotional response, or maybe you experience uncertainty, anxiety, confusion, how would you manage that? And how would you address it? How would you quell that emotional response so that your executive function can continue to function and you can still use logic and reason and assess evidence impartially, right? Because if we're all emotionally driven, that's going to be much more difficult. So if there is an emotional response, how would you manage that? If there's an emotional response by others near to you, how would you help them manage that? Okay. So moving beyond first responses and reactions, um, let's look at the broader collective around us. So, what disruptions would you anticipate either in your local setting, your family, your local setting, or your national or global setting? If there are disruptions due to this disclosure of NHI, what would you anticipate, and how would you navigate that? That's a question. If there are cultural misunderstandings or misinterpretations of the phenomenon, people projecting onto it religious beliefs, hopeful expectations, or they don't want to deal with it, want to write it off as something else. They're just going to project that onto it. How would you um, help people past that hurdle and get them to the point where they could see that there is an NHI present in the world? That's a question. Okay, so this is kind of like personal response. How would you respond? How would you conduct yourself? How would you manage yourself going into such an era of tremendous possible disruption, but also tremendous possible awakening to the reality that we're not alone and that the universe is much more than we ever thought? Okay. Next, let's look at claims. How would you verify the claims for yourself to your satisfaction of human actors and non-human actors in a disclosure scenario? So say a government, maybe not your government, came out and said, they're here, we're interacting with them, they want to partner with us, it's going to be great. They're giving us technology, it's going to do a lot of good for the world. Don't worry, we're managing it. How would you verify that claim to your satisfaction? I mean, most people would acknowledge they simply can't believe something just because it was said, right? So do you go back to the evidence? Do we start to look more attentively at the experiencer accounts of direct contact to see, does that corroborate the claims being made? What if an NHI itself said, "Oh, disclosure? Well, let's disclose for you. We'll do it. This is who we are. This is why we're here. This is how long we've been here. This is um, our involvement in human origins, scripture, formation of religions, civilizations." How would we verify those claims? Can we verify those claims? And if some faction of humanity feels like they have, will everyone else go along? Especially if there's an intention to become involved with this NHI, to make transactions, to receive things of great power and profitability. Uh, how does everyone feel who doesn't trust the claim, who does and is not going to get said benefit, right? And so the potential for conflict here is just tremendous, and the verification of claims very difficult. It could be impossible, in fact. And that might then lead us to certain other lines of response. Should NHI be here? Should we get our act together globally first and develop the regulatory bodies and global agreements and treaties needed to interface with another intelligence and then re-engage potentially. So there are many courses of action that are possible, and verifying claims, I think, is a important one to think through. Next, communication. I know it's getting trendy out there to imagine interacting with an extraterrestrial. It's a question for you, though. Are you willing to communicate and interact with a non-human intelligence? What are your personal boundaries and limitations regarding communication and interaction? What information are you willing to share and receive? And are you in a position to authenticate that information that you receive and also to guard your boundaries? Will your boundaries be acknowledged and accepted by the other party? Okay, so communication and interaction. Next, NHI response and behavior. So, what are your expectations post disclosure when they're acknowledged to be here? What are your expectations regarding how they conduct themselves, their response and their behavior? We might expect them to, uh, you know, operate within the rule of law, not undermine human institutions, so on and so forth. And then we have to look at it historically, is that what has happened, right? Because there could be a sudden change in behavior just to play game with human disclosure. So um, is there a continuation, a consistency in how they conduct themselves, or a sudden change? How are they responding to disclosure? I think that's going to be a very important thing to watch. And then lastly, stepping away from their response and behavior, just think of, back to this question I had in Slido, and I'd like to read through it with you, which is, how would you help in this phase of human realization that we're not alone? What role might you take? What part can you play within your local community? How can you get accurate information that is anchored in the reality of the historic phenomenon to people in a way that grounds them and that grounds their emotional response in an intellectual process, which will be very important? It's a question worth looking ahead because, there's a possibility that this is coming. Okay. So let's put up on screen your responses. Intensified sightings, mystery drones shutting down airports, military bases, and a psychological and military intimidation. Well, yes. I mean, that is in the historical record, most certainly. Um, military intimidation, some might say, well, it's not that. They're just testing our capabilities. They're not trying to intimidate. Um, you know, I think people can handle more than we think. I don't think, washing this as happy and positive and love and light is necessarily going to help people process it. There is a step function to this move forward. People have to step up and into a new plane of thinking about life and the universe. And so I think presenting them with some of the hard facts is really important. People deal with hard things all the time, by the way. They get cancer diagnoses. People lose children. They lose their financial fortune, their business, their home. War and pestilence and great calamities occur daily around the world, and people go about their business. They put their lives back together. We are resilient. And so, we don't want to coddle ourselves into this future encounter with NHI. So I resonate with that first point. Next, I would honestly try to drip and study the phenomenon and try to disclose in a way that's not going to ruin everything. And I'm taking a responsible stand as president. Well, yeah, let's try not to ruin everything through disclosure. This is where, we've got to get this out of national security interests and a military defense framing of the phenomenon, an aerospace framing, and get it out into the international community and talk about it as a human interaction, because that's what it is. I would wager the bulk of what of the NHI interaction is with individual humans. It's not actually in boardrooms with governments. It's not in military hangars. It's with the human species, which is you and me and everyone else. So we need to talk about that. But yeah, I mean, I would say the drip is happening already. How much time left do we have to study the phenomenon on our own terms? Because again, this is an interplay between sentiences. We're not just studying something that is mechanistic that's just sitting there, like a rock, or it's like a natural phenomenon like lightning, or it's a replicable phenomenon that we can provoke and replicate on our own terms. They are operating in the world. They're doing what they're doing, and we don't understand what they're doing. And so I think time is running thin to study it on our terms in a very kind of like, stepwise scientific fashion. It's getting to the stage where, we have to respond. And so we need a different framework to guide that response. All right, let's move on here. We would have to become more aware, self-sufficient to do our research based on confirmed evidence of intent. Why has our world become so chaotic, separated, and out of control if they have been here for such a long time? If their intention for humanity were good, wouldn't we have been directed to a more positive world community? Well, they have been present, and they do have profoundly strong and powerful capabilities, right? Presumably. I mean, there's a default thinking out there, which is if they wanted to destroy us, they could have already. And because they haven't, they must be here for good reasons. There's an implicit pessimism in that statement, and quite a statement of their capability. If they wanted to destroy us, they could have already. Okay. If they wanted to heal the planet and unite us as a species, they could have already. And because they haven't, okay, that's turning that logic over. And so, what has NHI not done that might indicate intent? And yes, our world is breaking down and technology is running out of control. And we have lots of concerning trends and flashpoints that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. And so they've been here. Now, are they just in an observational stance, or are they interacting with those trends in some way? That's what we need to go collect evidence about. So I would ask the question, the person who posted this, what would that targeted research be that would give rise to evidence of intent? Where would we look for that? I definitely do not think it's pointing a camera at the sky. Okay. Next up, depends on what is disclosed. If we're told there was a historical treaty and they were allowed to take advantage of humans and trade for technology, there's not much to explain, as we'd all be in shock. If they are purely benevolent, here to help us to interact positively, it'll be easier to get people on board with the idea. Well, to my knowledge, there's not a lot of evidence and indication of positive intent at this point. I'm not saying there's none, but the fundamentals of the phenomenon are such that I think we should be more cautious and responsible in our response to it. And there are claims of historical treaties to access human populations for abductions, for example, and that might be part of what comes out and needs to come out. So how would people deal with that? What if we've been tinkered with genetically? What if we're not all the same as a result? What if there are different classes of humans as a result? That would be a pretty shocking realization for people. And so, this is why the onboarding into the phenomenon is so important. That's why I have this show. That's why I'm even doing this, is to begin to help people approach this, think through its implications, deal with the hard stuff, and look ahead to the possibility and the promising stuff if we can move into what might be a larger system of life and interaction beyond our world. But if we can't even deal with what it is right up in front of our face, it has been in the last decades, we're not going to be able to approach that positive future. So, there's a hard diagnosis, I think, in this, and the patient, humanity, I think, is in a position to be like, all right, doctor, well then, what do I do? And some very intelligent people are going to have to step forward in many different disciplines to be that doctor, to say, okay, abductions are real. Some humans are not like other humans as a result of those abductions. Okay, here's what we do. I do think that there are actions that can be taken to effectively process that and bring us into acceptance of what has happened, and so that we can move forward. But it's going to take a lot of very intelligent people to get on board and to put down a lot of their energy to think through the implications and the path forward. All right, moving on. Intensified sight. Oh, I already read that. Let's see here. I really need to add this just because they're ahead technologically doesn't mean that we're not stronger. We're the gorilla. If we find the keys, they wouldn't stand a chance, which is why they are so shady. Possible. I mean, numerically, we're definitely stronger. Um, if their intention is not just to wipe us out, but to actually win us over, well, then we have all the power. We just decide whether we want to be won over or not. Now, but we have to understand the terms of the agreement, and if they're here to win, are we going to win? Is it a win-win or is it a win-lose? Right? But yes, we have some definite hidden strengths as a species. And this whole narrative that there's nothing we can do, it's too late, or that, again, they haven't done anything overtly hostile, therefore they must be here to help us. That is so not true. there are overtly hostile acts. I read some of them to you today in the historical record. And so, yeah, I think we need to anchor into those strengths. And I mean, this might fundamentally be more about us than them. It's about what humanity needs to do to pull itself together into a single human family that can engage with another form of intelligence that is already united in its intent. Whereas presently we're fractured and divided so many ways. Okay. Let's see what's next here. Okay, just jumping around a little bit. We would have to become more aware, self-sufficient, to do our research based on confirmed evidence of intent. Oh, I already read that too. This is jumping a lot. I've talked about this like a large corporation coming into a community offering jobs, etc., but ultimately causing harm to the environment and people's health. That might be an apropos analogy. Again, the corporation is not evil. Good people, right? They just don't understand the impact that they're having. And they don't either understand or regard the interests of those they're engaging. Happens all the time in the world. I like some of these responses. They need to survive just like us. So they and we are potentially competitors for resources to survive. Well, if you look at species interaction, that happens. There is competition for habitable space and life-giving resources. And we might live in a universe that has those constraints. And our world may actually be an aberration, or not an aberration, but a less competitive space among humans even. The universe might be even more competitive. Worlds like ours, more rare than common, we don't know the value of this planet. We don't know the value of its oceans, its biology, its diversity of biology. We don't know. It might be 1,000 times more valuable than we think. And then what? What does that mean? That means that, this world might be a competitive item on a marketplace out there. So this is where we need to gain some insight into the exopolitical and exosystemic dynamics at play that might be explaining the nature of the visitation taking place in part. Okay, this is great. We're going to move on now, and I just want to open it up to questions. I said I would do an emergent AMA, and so there it is. Ask me anything. We'll go over to the questions here. Put this up on screen. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. Question number 1. What if it's bad news? NHI, shady to say the least, yet some say, why live in fear? It's better to have good energy and good intentions. How am I supposed to do that when there is zero transparency from NHI? Will this topic climax or not? Not sure I understand the second question, but the first I certainly do. Fear is an adaptive response. It has kept us alive. Evolution has preferred that emotion because that instinct, that instinctual emotional response, tends to prefer other behaviors than one of absolute complicity and carelessness about one's own safety and survival. So I don't think living in fear versus living in good energy, good intentions is quite the dichotomy that's going to help us through this. Um, Good energy, yeah, good intentions. I strive to have that myself. But that doesn't mean I drop my guard with everyone who comes to my front door. That doesn't mean a person who walks up to me on the street, I just engage with good intentions and good energy and forget to look into their eyes and to look at their body language and try to perceive what it is they want from me. So these are not mutually exclusive. I think it is highly concerning that there is very little transparency from NHI. What kind of a visitor engages on those terms? This is where I think we need to assert our human terms. Maybe that's part of the problem. Give them the benefit of the doubt for a second. Maybe we human beings have not said, hey, welcome to Earth. Here are the rules, right? Here are the ethical guidelines. Here's what we value and what we don't value you doing. And if you want to engage with us or, harvest resources or what have you, engage in scientific study and research, these are the terms. Why would we not give ourselves the opportunity to make that statement and to negotiate intents? You know, it's kind of like the analogy or the common way of saying, don't leave money on the table, right? So it's like, we have a lot of agency in our world. We are the apex species. Would we just drop that and allow anyone to do anything? Why would we do that? I don't understand that intent. It's not defensive or aggressive necessarily or hostile on our part. That is actually good intentions. That is good energy. Why? Because it prefers human needs over the needs of those who are not within our Earth human system, who are not of our kind. Not to say that their needs don't matter, but like, do you want to do the right thing for your fellow man and woman and child? I do. That's good intentions. So therefore, we should bring that to the table, and we should make sure that there is a table, right? That there is a negotiation. Okay. What about the possibility that NHIs might operate on higher or lower frame rate clock speed than humans? I would say higher clock rate and speed than humans. Or what if they are essentially immortal and would take a very long view of any actions they might take with regard to us humans? Um, I would say there's a good chance that they have a longer view or just a different kind of time frame upon which they operate than we humans do. So that's very possible. I don't see them operating like snails in the world, right? Operating at snail pace. I mean, if that were the case, they would be under the oceans. We'd not see them, right? And they wouldn't be going 44,000 miles an hour and engaging children on the ground in South Africa, the Ariel school case and other alarming encounters like that. And so, it has been observed that these entities move in ways similar to our own. They're not operating. They're not moving a millimeter a minute, right? Nor are they going themselves biologically, physically, 1,000 miles an hour. They are interacting like another entity would, physically, touch, sight, and so forth. So, if we take the human NHI encounters as indication, I would say that they are operating within our frame of reality. How they view the universe and themselves, their consciousness, I'm sure, is unbelievably beyond our own. But yeah, I see them operating on terms of how human beings function, which, if I may describe that even better, their intent is to engage us, and we are the way we are. So a big part of their program of engagement will be conditioned to meet human tendencies and human dynamics because we are subject, you know? And so a lot of what they do is going to be doing what we might do. What do humans tend to do with each other? Well, that because that effectively works in a human world. So they would presumably be adapting to that or employing some of those strategies to meet their interests. Okay, let's move on. Let's see here. Grush hinted and Carl Nell to a deal. Carl Nell had a slide that said covert agreements and said NHI quid pro quo and disclosure having negative repercussions. Is there an intimidating tactic of NHI if we disclose? Great question. So yeah, that was one of Carl Nell's slides at the first Seoul conference about the possibility that covert agreements have been made, or that there is a transaction going on, quid pro quo, and that disclosure is not necessarily neutral. Certainly not for humans, but possibly not for them. And I have heard talk and concern among a lot of different people engaged on the topic about a concern about NHI retaliation, which is pretty alarming. I mean, these people are people who have insight into the phenomenon. If they're worried about retaliation, well, what game are we in here, folks? I mean, this is not kumbaya, hug the alien and cohabitate the earth for 1,000 years and share everything with them. I mean, right? It's something more like the natives of North America engaging colonial powers and inviting them in for dinner and finding out that they didn't exist 50 years later, or all sorts of negative repercussions took place. So uh, NHI retaliation for disclosure. Well, they, I think, do not want disclosure yet. And so if some government actor were to disclose soon, I would imagine that would present a conflict of interests. And would there be some kind of intimidation or retaliation? Very possibly. And that might come through via another state actor. I don't think we're at the point of lasers and mass destruction. I think this is more about influence. Entities influence each other to do what they want them to do. So if we're disclosing and NHI do not want us to do that, how would they influence us to stop? And I think there's a lot of things that could be done. And hey, who knows? Maybe that's happened already. Maybe there was an intent to disclose a decade ago or at the turn of the millennium and it didn't happen. And why didn't it happen? I think we should be thinking about influence in that way. Okay. Do you think NHI is in charge of the secrecy, possibly biomimicking humans, wearing suits or something and intimidating even the tough guys? Can NHI look like us sometimes? Is that possible? Well, to my knowledge, yes. It is possible and probable that NHI can both alter our perception of them, that they potentially can masquerade in human form through a variety of means, whether that's using a human body like an avatar, whether that's extracting the consciousness of a human and installing a non-human consciousness in that person. I don't have solid verification of that side, but I have heard some pretty interesting stories that would make one start to look deeper. And then there's the whole hybridization program that has been surmised to be connected to the abduction program. Because the abduction program, by all accounts of experiencers, is an attempt to study, to collect data, to engage in medical experiments, to potentially put things in people's bodies, implants, to force human beings into reproductive acts and to harvest the results of those acts. I mean, folks, what are we talking about, right? I mean, if that's happening, now maybe you're not convinced it's happening, that's fine. But if that's happening, wow, we got a problem. And we need to deal with that problem. And this is a big part of what I advocate, is that if there is a hostile element that is operating in ways that are transgressing our human values and our human interests, we must deal with that first. The universe and consciousness and all the good stuff that's out there, and I'm sure it is, and I hope we get to it. I really do. I really don't want to just be stuck on Earth, and I know you don't either. We want to expand into that universe. Don't worry, we can go there, but we have to deal with the stuff that's here, right? And with what the evidence is presenting us. And so if experiencers are reporting reproductive interventions, right, that means that there is an intent to alter the nature of the human species. Now, some would say, oh, but it's a good alteration. It's an upgrade. How do you know that? Do you know the nature of the intervention taking place into people's bodies? Do you know what they're doing in replicating sperm and ova and taking embryos and growing them outside the mother and reintroducing them? I mean, do you know? It doesn't matter if there was a study done 12 years ago that brought together all the people who loved it and said, how did you feel about it? Oh, you loved it? Okay, it must be good, right? That's not enough. That is absolutely not enough. And so we need to seriously understand the nature of the experiencer account and the characteristic of the entity reported and the characteristic of the event of potential abduction. I think that's really important. Okay, let's move on to the next one here. Have they planted certain technologies in cities that would affect citizens' physical and mental well-being? Certainly, we are more distracted by our devices lately, but I always wonder if there is something more to this phenomenon. Well, if I were a hyper intelligent advanced sentience with the technology of mind to both interact with human beings psychically, non physically, but also alter their psychic state, I would devise a way to amplify that to a whole population level. It's not very efficient to go around either plucking people out of their bedrooms at night or one by one engaging them psychically. That sounds exhausting. I mean, how much, how many entities are really here? Okay, I mean, are there billions of them, right? Millions of them? Maybe there's thousands. Maybe there's 10,000. Um, and of course there might be competing groups as well. And so I would imagine physical resources might be limited. There's some kind of supply chain that's allowing them to be here, and they have to manage those supply lines. But there is a psychic resource that might be limited. And so instead of going one by one, how about you develop an amplifier that affects a group or a city or a population? Maybe it's not a very, it can't do very targeted work. Like it can't literally put a single thought in the minds of a million people all at once. Maybe it can just agitate them. Maybe it can depress their executive function. Maybe it can produce impulse, high impulsivity, and so forth. And then, of course, we already have, you know, our own places to go with that impulsivity and that distraction and that agitation. So yeah, people pull up their apps and they doom scroll their feeds, and NHI is not creating the feed in that scenario, but they might be encouraging us to be more impulsive and more prone to distraction, so that we don't perceive what's going on and we don't certainly respond to them, but also we don't take care of business here on the ground, and we increase our vulnerability and we become more desperate and our world breaks down. And now who knows, maybe we'll be desperate for solutions from the system beyond. And non-human technology might look really good at that point. And in fact, we might have no option at that point, right? So again, in the art of the deal, yes, the art of the deal. The man who wrote that is in power in my country. And in the art of the deal, we should think about how another player might have an interest, might take a stake, and might try to influence things extremely intelligently and efficiently in ways that are undetectable, that can never correlate back to them, and that tap our existing human dynamics and tendencies, our distractions, our conflicts, and so forth. That's intelligent deal making. If that is what's going on, if this is a species to species interaction, I would say they are winning the deal. They are going up and down the football field, scoring touchdowns, and we can't even get off the 1 yard line. So if we're going to get off that 1 yard line, we're going to have to think procedurally, intellectually. We're going to have to employ logic, our ability to make direct observation, and to collect targeted evidence that substantiate key elements of the phenomenon that reveal intent, so that we can produce some kind of platform for united and coordinated human action in response to them. That is what I think we need to do. So folks, it's been a pleasure walking through this with you once again, and we will continue, of course. I'm going to put up on screen here. Let's see. Want to announce, I think I'm not announcing it, I'm actually just reminding you that I did announce it, that a new platform is coming called Forerunner. And Forerunner will be an online educational community engaging in the content that Emergent is bringing forward, and also engaging in the extensive content of my upcoming course on decoding NHI intent. I have so much to share with you, so much. And I look forward to doing that. And Forerunner will be the place where it's happening, and that will be launching in the May timeframe. I also want to encourage you to register for my course, readsummers/course. That's going to be starting not this coming week as I hoped. I had some unexpected family challenges that I have to deal with, and so I had to postpone my course until May. But it's going to be even better. We're going to have more interaction, and it will be a true journey into the phenomenon and an amplification of your awareness and understanding. And my hope really is to break through this force field that seems to encapsulate us and make us forever students of the phenomenon, forever in a position not to be able to say we know anything about the phenomena, to break through that and to form that starting assessment and to make intelligent estimations of the nature of the phenomenon and to move from there. I think it is possible to break through. And that's what my work is all about, frankly. So I highly recommend the course. Got 175 people registered already, and that will be starting May 21st. You can sign up there at the link on screen. If you're not on my newsletter, definitely do so. Updates on the course, Forerunner, episode summaries all come to that email list. And with that, folks, thank you for being with me once again. And in the future, the next few months, we'll be diving deeper into specific topics related to the human NHI interaction that's taken place. It's been my pleasure to have this kind of 3-episode broad walk around with you. But going forward, we'll be plunging into the specifics. So keep your questions coming, stay sane, engage your logic, and keep looking at the evidence. Because the evidence is indication of the nature of what is taking place in this phenomenon. With that, I'll say good night. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll